All right, so we're continuing with the David Ferrie files. This is part 4. We are moving into an interview of David Ferrie, so we're going to hear some of David Ferrie's own words. Fascinating, fascinating stuff. This is on page 129 of 428. Interview of David Ferrie by John Voles at the District Attorney's Office at approximately 10 a.m. on Thursday, December 15th, 1966. Voles, were you acquainted with Oswald? Ferrie, to my knowledge, no. I was told, and I believe, but I am not sure, 3 years ago, I believe it was a Mr. Wall from the FBI who told me I think I met Oswald. Something is telling me at the moment, roughly at the age of 15. Oswald was 15? Right. I have no way of estimating this. This was told to me third, fourth, fifth hand. When the assassination of Kennedy took place, a picture of Oswald was supposed to have been on television, and a young fellow whose name I don't recollect, and the only hook I have is that his uncle runs a florist shop somewhere out on Canal Street, recognized the Oswald face on the TV presentation. He then calls one of the stations, WDSU, or WWL, and says that he recognized the face and knew this fellow Oswald. In the interview, either newspaper or TV, but I am pretty sure it was public rather than an investigation, he and Oswald had been in the Civil Air Patrol cadet program in my unit, and of course this kind of surprised me because I didn't recognize the name of this lad that identified Oswald's picture. If you'll notice, on the left-hand side, written in the notes, says Rebel. That's Louis Rebel, the guy who took over the Frente Democratico Republico for Sergio Arcacha after he was removed in 1962. So, Rebel is one of these guys who's kind of a hang-around of David Ferrie, involved in all this Cuban CIA stuff. I can't place him at any level in the hierarchy of the assassination, though. So, it seems to be just one of the people on the outskirts. This is being very frank. When I got hit with this thing, I started my own investigation for a 10-day period. It was back and forth between me and the FBI. So far as I could develop, this florist shop fellow had gone to school with Oswald and tried to get Oswald socialized unsuccessfully as part of the attempt to get him in the Civil Air Patrol. I understand he was in there for only a matter of days, 2 or 3 weeks. This young fellow told me that he had, in fact, in company with other cadets, come by my house. As near as I could put that together, I must have been living in Kenner. He said I had met Oswald. How did you get this information, Voles asks. Some through the FBI and some I developed on my own. You have no recollection of Oswald? Ferrie says, no, I don't. This much is of interest. A fellow by the name of Jack Martin kicks the whole thing off and gets me involved. I don't mind this being in a public record. Martin is a psychopath. Martin has a special vendetta for me. Why? Ferrie says, first, how do you explain a psychopath? However, there are specific grounds. I used to work for G. Ray Gill. Martin fancies himself as an investigator. He acquainted himself with me and tried to get some of Gill's work. Gill would not have him because, as Gill says, Martin plays both sides of the street. One day I threw Martin out of the office. Not bodily, but I ordered him out. Remember the time of the first Marcello case in 1963? Gill is in New Orleans lawyer. Gill's the New Orleans lawyer for Marcello. Martin told Klein that I had taught Oswald how to shoot a rifle, which is interesting since I am not such a good shot myself. Hilarious. And what do these notes say? It says, actually Coleman. That is true. It is actually Coleman, not Klein. In any event, that year, the year of the assassination, I am uncertain, but my belief is that Oswald was here in the city of New Orleans. Voles asks, how do you know that? Ferrie says, I am trying to remember. Newspaper stories. Klein questioned me about this. To my knowledge and belief, I haven't met Oswald. I was busy working for Gill at the time. Do you know Morris Brownlee? In what connection? Ferrie, I have known Morris for 10 or 12 years. He's been in a lot of trouble during that time. Did you take a trip on November 22nd, 1963? Ferrie, whatever the day that the verdict was rendered in the Marcello case, I took a weekend vacation. Kind of funny that Ferrie would use the point of remembrance being the day the verdict came down in the Marcello trial, because allegedly he was at the Marcello trial, but he wasn't. He wasn't. He was in Dallas. Voles asks, where did you go? Ferrie says, Houston, Galveston, and Vinton. I had some business for Gil to take care of. The lies began. What business was this with Gil? Ferrie said one of his cases in federal court. Marion James Johnson was on appeal. I forgot whether I was to ask him for money or transcript or what. Where did you go first? Houston. What day did you, what did you do in Houston? Ferrie said, we went ice skating. Who went with you? Ferrie says, Alvin Boboof and Melvin Coffey. He is a rocket engineer at one of the electronic places. Note, Melvin Coffey is just an alias for Leighton Martins. You say you went ice skating in Houston. Do you know what rink? To my knowledge, it was the only one in this area. That is correct. Used to be one in Baton Rouge. I am a Yankee and I like to ice skate, and that whole time during the trial was pretty much a 7-day-a-week thing. Do you recall when you went ice skating? Ferrie says, when the verdict came in, as I recall, we had to go back to the office at noon. If I could recall the house the president was shot. Wait a minute. If I could recall the house the president was shot. Don't know what that means. It was at the time we heard the president was shot. In the next 2 or 3 hours thereafter, the verdict came in. Then we went to the Royal Orleans Hotel and we had a victory party, or whatever you call it. This thing must have gone on until supper time. Events are starting to come back to me, but memory is a tricky thing. Wall would know. Voles, it was in the evening hours you left for Houston. Then there's a break here. Something is cut. I can't exactly tell what. Looks at the bottom of page 3. It skips to David Ferrie answering the question. It starts with paperwork, period. We wanted to go ice skating and then hunting. We were going to hunt geese south of Beaumont, in that area to be more specific. It seems to me we got to Houston. How long does it take to get to Houston? About 8 hours, I think. Did you ever fly to Houston? Ferrie says, I fly extensively. I was in Houston 3 times over the past week. I guess we got there about midnight. Had you planned this trip? Ferrie says, we made up our minds when the Marcello trial was over we were going to take a vacation. During or after the trial. Ferrie says, even before the Marcello case, we worked for G. Ray Gill any hour or any day, and that usually was most days and most hours. He leads you a wild chase. Voles says there had been a contemplated trip for some time. You were going hunting, but you didn't know exactly where you were heading for? Ferrie says, and couldn't have cared less. Whose car? Mine. What kind of car? A 60 or 61 Comet wagon. At the time that we left, we had no idea where we were going. Voles, you were going hunting. Did you take any weapons? Yes. What kind? Shotguns? How many? I assume offhand a weapon apiece. Voles says you went to Houston and went ice skating. Do you recall whether it was the same day you left here? We left at night. Stayed in a motel. Have to go back to the FBI for accuracy. Sometime that next day, we went ice skating. I was the only one that knew how. Voles asks, did you rent skates or did you have your own? We rented them. I don't think I had my own skates. I think we rented them. How long did you stay in Houston? My recollection of the moment is we stayed there that next day, the day we ice skated. That would be November 23rd. Whether we stayed in Houston the night of the 23rd, I don't know. Something tells me we went to Galveston. We were looking for some evening activity. What do you mean, nightlife? You can call it nightlife. Voles asked, looking for ladies? Ferrie says, we went down to Galveston and we found the town was dead. Did you leave for Galveston in the morning or at night? Do you know what you did when you got to Galveston, besides finding it dead? Ferrie says, I remember in the morning in Galveston, because we went out looking for bars and found out the only thing you could buy was beer. By our standards here, it was dead. It couldn't get deader. So far, the vacation had been falling on its head. It seems to me it was inclement, some inclemency in the weather. Coolness. I don't know what we expected for November, but we wanted something pleasant. I'm trying to recall whether I stopped at Vinton on the way to Houston or coming back. I think I may have my dates all mixed up here. I think we stayed in Vinton that night. The night of the 22nd? The night of whatever date we left here. We went to Mary and James Johnson's Roadhouse, a combination restaurant, bar, etc. That was in Vinton. Yes. What made you decide to go to Vinton? Sooner or later, I was going to have to go there for Gil. This was two birds with one stone. What did you do in Vinton? Talk to Mary and James Johnson. The night of the 22nd? Yes, I think so. Once again, if I could get the record, I could tell you, don't forget this was 3 years ago. So at this point in time, I need to point out that he's saying that he went to Mary and James Johnson in Vinton on the night of the 22nd, right? But when you go back, if you caught it, he said that he went to Houston first, right? And then he went to Mary and James Johnson's. So he's mixing up where they went when. And the reason for that is because they didn't go any of these fucking places. This is all make-believe. Sergio Arcacha went to the Winterland with the two kids, not David Ferrie. And as we go through this and get through the Galveston documents, you'll start to see how I put that together. All right, so the night of the 22nd, Ferrie says, yes, I think so. Once again, if I could get the record, I could tell you. Don't forget this was 3 years ago. Then you went to Houston after Vinton. I am recollecting it that way right now. The reasons I am saying that is this. When we left Galveston, we decided to go look for the geese. I remember I boarded a ferry across a channel down along the South Shore. We did, in fact, get to where the geese were, and there were thousands, but you couldn't approach them. They were a wise bunch of birds. Did you kill any geese? No. Was that early in the morning? Daylight, but not early in the morning. That would be about the 24th you went to Vinton, Houston, and Galveston. I say it's all right in the absence of anything else. After Galveston, then what? Ferrie says, we decided to go to Alexandria, Louisiana, where Beaubouf had some relatives. Then we got the idea of staying there for 2 or 3 days. I decided to call Gil and tell him we were not coming back for a couple days. Gil told me you'd better get back here. We're in major trouble. Jack Martin told Klein that I knew Lee Harvey Oswald had conspired with Oswald in the assassination of Kennedy. I came back and don't recall which day it was. Sat in this very office. I was pretty much surrounded by the investigators and everybody. Klein asked me pretty much the questions that you are asking me right now. They showed me 4 or 5 police photos of people and asked if I could identify them, and I couldn't. One was supposed to be Lee Harvey Oswald for an arrest for disturbing the peace here in New Orleans. Klein decided that I did know Lee Harvey Oswald and arrested me as a fugitive from Texas, and they took me over to the 1st District. I stayed there for a couple days while all this checked out. How long did you stay in Alexandria? I don't think a full day. I don't recall staying overnight, and somewhere along the line we thought we'd better check in, and that's when Gil told me to come back at once. How did you arrange for gasoline? I don't recall. Do you have a credit card? No. None at all? No. Was the trip uneventful? Did you have any difficulties? Not that I can recall. These events that stay in my mind are ice skating, deadness in Galveston, geese, and the phone call to Gil. Did you do any hunting in Alexandria? I don't believe we did. Again, I would have to go back to something else to refresh my memory. Did you meet any friends? Did you have any acquaintances in any of those towns? I know Mary and James Johnson, a business acquaintance. No one in Houston or Galveston. How about Alexandria? These would be Beaubouf's relatives. Now, let me pause right here because this is totally bunk. I mean, whether or not Beaubouf has relatives there is irrelevant. What is relevant, and I think we'll get to it at some point in this file, or it might be in one of the other files, but Garrison spent a lot of time investigating a hotel that was in Alexandria. And if Garrison was spending a lot of time investigating a hotel in Alexandria, you can say sure as shit that there was something going on at that hotel in Alexandria. Now, according to these guys' story, the official story, and all the stories, these guys never actually stay at a hotel in Alexandria. This is part of the story, but this never actually happens. We will get to what happens as we move further along. Ferrie, these would be Beaubouf's relatives. Vols, did you all 3 come back together? Just the 3 of us, Beaubouf, Coffey, and myself. Around that particular time in that area, what was Morris Brownlee doing? Ferrie, I don't even know right now. He was just a friend of yours, or was he in your unit? Ferrie says, I don't think he ever joined the Civil Air Patrol. This is going back 12 or 13 years. Vols, around that particular time, did you ever go hunting with Morris? Does Morris ever go hunting? I would imagine so. I don't know if he ever went hunting. With me, I don't know. This isn't the kind of thing you remember. Vols, did you ever take any trips with Morris? Yes, I think so, but I'm not sure about this. I would have to ask Gil. Somewhere back in 61 or 62, I had to go to Mississippi for Gil on an oil bill. I believe I took Brownlee with me because at the time he was doing a little work for Gil. I believe that one of many trips we took to Vinton because we were back and forth quite a number of times. I believe he was on one of those. Morris went along with Alice Godot. Probably Alice Guidros, who's G. Ray Gill's secretary. Yeah, Guidros, not Godot. And I went down to one of the small towns, New Iberia or somewhere. There was a murder case where a defendant had to be interviewed. Vols, that was 61, 62. Ferrie said, could have been 63. Do you recall where you stayed in Galveston? No. Do you recall where you stayed in Alexandria? No. My only source would be the FBI. So Ferrie doesn't remember where we stayed anywhere. You're positive that all three of you came back together. Ferrie, that is my recollection. The only way I would know for sure would be to call Mr. Wall or the individual. Now, who he's talking about here, I don't know. Mr. Wall could be Mr. Brecht Wall, but he said Mr. Wall of the FBI. Vols, you are positive it was just the three of you that went and came back. Have you ever gone to Dallas? Yes, I was in Dallas in March or April of this year. How about around the time you went to Houston? Thank God, no. As Gil said, if I had been in Dallas, I would have been in jail. Vols, since it came up earlier, you said you were supposed to have taught Oswald how to shoot a rifle. Have you ever taught anybody how to shoot a rifle? Ferrie, yes. This was in the Civil Air Patrol cadet program. Teach them how to shoot a .22 and sometimes something heavier. It's part of the program. Vols, did you teach any of the boys who were on the trip with you how to shoot? Ferrie, Coffee, I don't know. Beaubouf was a born hunter. How about Brownlee? He likes the outdoors, but whether he goes hunting, I don't know. He's the type that would collect botanical specimens, or if he did hunt, he would use a bow and arrow instead of shooting. You say Morris wasn't interested in guns. I don't know one way or the other. Morris always seemed to come up with an amazing fund of information on all kinds. This moment, my recollection of Morris is that his interest would be physics, rocketry, electronics, and philosophy. Was he ever on these cadet training encampments that you were talking about? Ferrie, I don't recall one way or the other. If you're interested in completing this thing, I will try to remember and write this down for you. Vols asks, what are you doing now? Ferrie says, flying. For anyone in particular? Flying for myself, flight instruction. One of your former associates is one of my customers, Jerry Orio. I feel reasonably confident that the FBI agents who worked on this would cooperate and I could get other names, the times, and everything else because at the time, we had to work out a rather fabulous time schedule. They worked out Oswald's and mine too. Then I could give you more definite answers. The two boys that went to Texas with, were they in your unit at the time? I was not in the Civil Air Patrol at that time. Do you know if they knew Morris? Yes, I think so. In what connection to and what depth, I'm not sure. What was Coffee's first name? Melvin. He worked at Michaud. When was the last time you saw Coffee or Beaubouf? I see Beaubouf routinely, but Coffee not for a long time. He was upset about this because of his job. Who does Beaubouf fly for? He is not employed as a pilot. He's looking for that kind of employment. Do you know what he's doing now? Working for his father-in-law in a meat packing place. In Arabi, I'm assuming that's in Louisiana, considering Beaubouf never left Louisiana. Do you do any flying? Civil Air Patrol, instructions on the side. Do you do any charter work? It is prohibited. Martin had me going to Cuba. It was in the newspapers, in a 110-mile-an-hour airplane with 4 hours of gas. Were you doing any charter flying at the time when he accused you of this? No, I was supposed to be working for the airline. Was also supposed to have gone in 1963. Klein asked if that summer I had been in Cuba. That was some more of Jack Martin. Is Pershing Gervais still around? Gervais was one of the lawyers, I believe. Vols, no, he is not in our office anymore. Do you want to see him? Not especially. I just wanted to refer you back to him as to why I am here this morning. I am thinking about Martin's personality. Martin somehow gets to be near the bride at every wedding and the corpse at every funeral. He somehow gets involved in civil and criminal affairs. Martin gets in on all these interesting little things. He tried to get Pershing Gervais on brutality. There was a big mess for a few days. I have sort of been speculating on my own why I'm here, and I think the Warren report, and I think that Jack Martin would have seized on this because this is exactly his type of meat. I imagine he would come to someone like Frank Klein, Pershing Gervais, or Jim Garrison, and sometimes Martin convinces himself he's on confection. Sometimes he doesn't. I know he was in the psycho ward in Charity for a while and was in the psycho ward in Texas. He used to run a diploma mill in Texas. Okay, so what he's saying here is very important because Jack Martin, a.k.a. Edward Suggs, was superdosed with LSD, probably part of some CIA shenanigans, and he got locked up in the mental ward at the state hospital at Jackson. I think it was called Charity Hospital at Jackson. But yeah, that's the same place that Rocherme ended up. Same place that Oswald, quote unquote Oswald, allegedly tried to get a job, which then was led to the voter registration incident. But yeah, so when I see David Ferrie talk about things like that about Jack Martin that are significant in the identification of Jack Martin, it just makes me wonder how much he knew more about Jack Martin than we do. Vols, you feel he's responsible for your being here today? Ferrie, yes, I feel it is a possibility. Have you read any of these articles? Ferrie, no, I am too busy trying to earn a living. I do know I have seen statements regarding Governor Conley. I've got nothing to hide. But I have been trying to figure out for the last 2 days what I was being subpoenaed for, and I tried calling everybody to find out what it was all about. I tried Gil. He didn't know anything. The reason I'm not on this Martin thing is that Gil tells me for 3 or 4 days back, Martin called him and wanted to know where I was working, and how I could be reached. Gil and I speculated over various possibilities, and this Kennedy thing was one of them. Would you be willing to submit to a polygraph? Ferrie says, certainly. I would be willing to submit to the truth serum. I have no hesitation at all. Other areas, here we were done with that, and we're moving on to this next document that says, other areas of information which were not uncovered during the investigation not previously known to Eastern. So now we're back to the investigation of David Ferrie by Eastern Airlines and uncovering what information that they did not know prior to hiring him. 1, Ferrie's record with Civil Air Patrol and his organization of an unauthorized unit. 2, Ferrie's connection with a club for juveniles known as the Omnipotents. 3, Ferrie's activities in New Orleans in connection with his claim to have a PhD and to be a research psychologist. 4, Ferrie's public claims in New Orleans to be a graduate of Phoenix University. Ferrie's involvement in 1960 in the case of a runaway juvenile, Albert Shermy. That's the Al Shermy case we talked about briefly, and I wrote about in my book. 6, Ferrie's visit to Al Shermy while the boy was in detention under the guise of being a doctor. There's a whole bunch of handwritten notes here that I can't really read. Let me see if I can kind of muddle through some of this. Not looking too good. All right. Ferrie's involvement in 1961 in the case of a runaway juvenile, Al Landry. More handwritten notes that I can't read. Ferrie's involvement with the Holy Catholic Apostolic Church and his expulsion from that organization. That was the organization that Ferrie had been involved with and expelled for his involvement with something sexual involving children. 9, Ferrie's involvement with the American Medical Association, whereby he was warned to stop practicing medicine or face criminal charges. 10, Federal Aviation Agency fine in 1960 for permitting a student pilot to solo in his aircraft with a passenger. 11, Ferrie's speech in 1961 before the Military Order of World Wars, which speech was stopped because of Ferrie's attacks upon the President of the United States. 12 Ferries claimed that some Eastern employees were communists and fellow travelers. And more handwritten notes. Refusal of Ferrie to cooperate in company's investigation of above matters. On February 18, 1963, the company attempted to continue its investigation of the above matters by inquiries about them to Ferrie. He refused to answer any questions the above subjects, including questions about his explanation as to why the criminal charges had been brought against him. Garrison's notes get copy and introduced to, looks like BD. All right. Memorandum, March 9, 1967. Al Oster, Executive Assistant District Attorney. From Sergeant Tom Duffy and Officer C.J. Navarre. Interview of Charles Holliday, residing in Algiers, Louisiana. On March 7, 1967, at 7:30 p.m., Officer Navarre. We've talked about Officer Navarre, I think, in the Kerry Thornley file, so this will come full circle. This interview was conducted by phone at 362-5087. Mr. Holliday stated that he was a member of the CAP, the New Orleans Airport Squadron from 1954 through 1956. In 1956, he then went on to active duty with the United States Air Force. Mr. Holliday related that he knew David Ferrie from being a member of the CAP. Further, that Ferrie was a weird character. He heard that later Mr. Ferrie was within airlines. The only thing that stood out was the fact that Ferrie mentioned several times that he had a drug or combination of drugs that he could take, and no doctor could say he didn't die a natural death. Mr. Holliday related that he never did personally see David Ferrie mix any drugs, also that he has never gone to David Ferrie's house. Mr. Holliday stated that 5 or 6 boys were close to Ferrie, and one of them was Tommy Bowman, who at the present time is not residing in New Orleans, and it is unknown where he is now residing. Also a Mr. Penguy, Charlie Robertson, and Phil Cousins, who had a brother by the name of Pete Cousins. So, this is in regards to the Eastern Airlines documents that they were gathering statements and witnesses in regards to Ferrie's being a pedophile, right? So, they knew this stuff, and so they were talking to everybody, getting all kinds of records, and that's what's going on here. This stuff, I believe we've already covered. I covered it somewhere, so I'm going to skip over it. Let's look into this really quickly. What is this? Lee Harvey Oswald, assassination of the president. Some of this is really smudged and you can't really read it. Investigation made by Special Agent Anthony Garrett's Special Agent in Charge John Rice. Synopsis: investigation disclosed that information furnished by Jack S. Martin to the effect that David William Ferrie associated with Lee Harvey Oswald at New Orleans and trained Oswald in the use of a rifle with a telescopic lens. Also that Ferrie had visited Dallas several weeks prior to the assassination of John F. Kennedy is without foundation. Jack S. Martin, who had the appearance of being an alcoholic, has the reputation locally of furnishing incorrect information to law enforcement officers, attorneys, etc. So this is a detailed investigation, allegedly, into the allegations made by Jack Martin, which then exculpate David Ferrie, right? So, of course, they need to get David Ferrie out of this picture. Details of investigation at 5 p.m. on 11/24/63. That's the Sunday. Donald Mitchell, 1501 and a half, General Taylor Street, New Orleans, rear basement apartment, called at the office and was interviewed by reporting agent. Mr. Mitchell stated that he shares this apartment with one J. Philip Stein, a.k.a. Jerry. Mr. Mitchell also advised that the telephone in this apartment is in the name of Herman S. Coleman, Assistant District Attorney, Parish of Orleans, New Orleans, Louisiana, for the reason that Mr. Coleman formerly shared that apartment with J. Philip Stein, but that Coleman recently married and moved from the apartment. The telephone number in question is Twinbrook 18703. All right, so let me summarize this. What has happened here is after the assassination, you get Jack Martin goes on a Jack Martin, who is allegedly Edward Suggs. However, I allege that at some times, Jack Martin was actually Jean-Pierre Lafitte. Now, who it was at which times, who the fuck knows, but I can tell you, I'm positive that there were at least those two men in New Orleans sharing that alias. So, after the assassination, Jack Martin goes on a phone call ratting spree, and he calls the FBI, and he calls this apartment looking for the assistant district attorney in New Orleans. And so he's calling around looking for all this stuff, and this is just documentation of that investigation because he throws David Ferrie under the bus. However, David Ferrie can't be thrown under the bus because if they have anything pointing at David Ferrie and a conspiracy, it takes everything away from the lone gunman, story. Therefore, David Ferrie, no matter what he fucking did, no matter how much evidence there was of his guilt, no matter how much proof there was he was in fucking Dallas, and that he was one of two shooters on the grassy knoll, they have to squash that information at all costs. Okay, so that's what this is. And this interview with Coleman and Stein is nothing more than illustrating that Jack Martin is what's the only reason we know about any conspiracy at all, and what kicked the whole thing off is Jack Martin's phone calls. I do 100% agree with that. And if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be sitting here today. And so I don't want to go through all this because, number one, I already went through all this. I forget. I must have done it when I went over the Kerry Thornley files because this stuff was in the Kerry Thornley files also. Makes you wonder why Garrison put the shit in the Kerry Thornley files. Yeah, so that's all this is. Establishing that Jack Martin made the phone call and that Jack Martin was attempting to throw David Ferrie under the bus. It's extremely significant, and all this stuff here is extremely significant in as far as understanding the chain of events that led to David Ferrie. I'm trying to see if there's any parts of this that need to... I think I can skip the whole fucking thing, actually, because a lot of the stuff here, they're talking about the actual trip that they went on, which we'll cover in fucking nauseating detail. That is covered through other documents later, and so we can skip all this shit here. All right, so statement November 27, 1963, FBI. Frank Karachi. This stuff we talked about in the Kerry Thornley files, but we're going to talk about it again because it is relevant to David Ferrie and his trip to Galveston. Frank Karachi, co-owner Club 500 Bourbon Street, advised that he never met Jack Ruby, but he was aware of the fact that Jack Ruby was in New Orleans looking for dancers on about June of 1963 at about a time that Jeanette Conforto was completing her engagement at the Show Bar Club on Bourbon Street. Karachi recalled that one night, probably in June, he and Nick Carno, his partner, were in his office when his night manager, Cleve Dugas, came into the office and said there was a man who ran the Carousel Club in Dallas out front who wanted to talk to Karachi about hiring some dancers. First off, this whole story sounds fucking fishy because fucking Ruby was plugged into Marcello and the whole club circuit, and he didn't have to go soliciting fucking dancers from people he didn't know. The whole story sounds ridiculous. I don't know why this whole thing came up in the first place. So he told Dugas to tell the person to go to the show bar and talk to Conforto. Karachi stated that neither he nor Carno met this individual, and he had concluded that this individual was Ruby. So, why is this in the David Ferrie file? All right, so we'll move on to the next one, November 27, 63. This might be a continuation of that. It says Alfred Pecoraro. Wonder if there's a relationship to Onofio Pecoraro, a.k.a. Nofio Pecora, who was one of the guys who was managing the Town and Country on behalf of Marcello. He was definitely connected to David Ferrie, for sure. That fills in the gap in as far as the phone calls between Ferrie's apartment and the Town and Country. So, Alfred Pecoraro, 1205 North Rampart Street, student at Louisiana State University, New Orleans, advised that he is publicity chairman of the New Orleans Council for Peaceful Alternatives. All right, so let me just fucking say this. I've said it before. I'll say it again. Don't join any organizations, okay? Don't fucking get in... What the fuck is wrong with people joining organizations? Okay, joining organizations is probably the dumbest fucking thing you can do. Just so go ahead and associate knowingly with some fucking Fed on some level. Give me a fucking break. All these fucking organizations are bullshit. They're all federal organizations. They're all NGOs. They're nonsense. Don't join any organizations, okay? No matter what the fuck it is. And is a member of a socialist study group in New Orleans, which meets regularly at various locations throughout the city. He said the last meeting of the New Orleans Council for Peaceful Alternatives was in June of 1963. Pecoraro advised among his acquaintances are William Edwin Clark, Lionel Hampton, Mitchell, John D. Bass, Bill Hogan, Robert Hoffman, and Dave Hoffman. Pecoraro described Dave Hoffman as apolitical. He said the others generally travel in the same circles as he does. He noted that Hoffman last year was editor of The Read at Tulane University. He stated Hoffman resides on Decatur Street, New Orleans, in the area of Esplanade Avenue. Pecoraro advised he was certain that he never had attended a meeting of any group contemporarily with Lee Harvey Oswald. He examined Oswald's photograph and stated that he could not say that he had never seen this man in person. Pecoraro advised he most certainly had never attended any gathering where assassination of a president was discussed, that any group with which he is associated advocates peace, and they would not sit through such discussions. Subsequent to President Kennedy's death, Pecoraro had discussions with Lionel Hampton Mitchell about Oswald, and Mitchell likewise stated that he had never seen Oswald on any occasion in New Orleans. Aha. Now it appears that we get some good stuff. Federal Bureau of Investigation, November 29th, 1963. Jesse R. Corr III, 3022 St. Charles Avenue, stated that he was presently director of the Jesse R. Corr public relations firm located in room 211 at the International Trade Mart. The CIA International Trade Mart, 134 Camp Street, New Orleans, Louisiana, and added that he was also present during public relations political work for his client Robert F. Kennan, candidate for governor, state of Louisiana. He stated sometime during the middle of the month in September 1963, he was conferring with a political associate at the Roosevelt Hotel in New Orleans, Louisiana, when he heard a rumor that someone was picketing the International Trade Mart and telephoned radio station WDSU to inquire if the Trade Mart was being picketed. He stated that he was informed that it had been reported that pickets were located at this mart, and Corr added that he was aware that this mart had previously been picketed by extremist groups, the names of which he had never been made aware of, but explained that to his knowledge they were small groups of males, but predominantly females who picked both City Hall and International House at New Orleans as these buildings had displayed the United Nations flag. Corr stated that he immediately went over to this mart to see what was going on and noted at this location two persons who appeared to be handing out leaflets bearing the notation "Hands Off Cuba" and a name stamped L.H. Oswald, 4907 Magazine Street, New Orleans, Louisiana. He stated at this location he immediately conferred with a friend of his and Trade Mart associate named John Alice, owner of John Alice & Company, import-export firm, International Trade Mart, an import-export firm located in the CIA-run International Trade Mart, front for smuggling. He stated that Alice showed him a handbill similar to the one described above, and Corr added that he was so angered with the entire idea of someone passing out such handbills that he immediately wadded the handbill up and threw it in the face of one person passing out such handbills. Corr stated in addition, he cursed this individual out and called him a communist. Corr explained that the person whom he threw this handbill moved his head slightly and did not speak to him, but gave him a cold and icy stare. Corr stated that on this occasion he did not know the name of this individual, but explained that without any doubt this individual was directing the activities on this occasion at the Trade Mart, and further explained that it was not until November 22nd, 1963, when Lee Harvey Oswald's picture appeared on television, that he was aware the individual who was passing out these handbills on this occasion was identical with Lee Harvey Oswald. Now that is blatantly false. Provably false. And I'll get to why when I complete this paragraph. He advised that neither prior to this occasion nor subsequent to it had he seen this individual, with the obvious exception of seeing Oswald's picture on television in connection with the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. He described Oswald as approximately under 30, 5 foot 8 inches tall, 150 pounds, appearing frail with his hair thinning in the front and appearing dark but not black. Shortly after the above-described incident, Corr stated he went to his office in the Trade Mart and while there received a telephone call from someone located at the radio station WDSU, who inquired of Corr if a certain cameraman had arrived at the Trade Mart and if pictures were being taken of the activity at this location. He stated that he informed this person who called from the station that while he was observing the activity at this location, a photographer from this public station was observed to be taking pictures. Corr was furnished copies of approximately 6 photographs taken by radio station WDSU on this occasion and picked out an individual from among persons represented in these photographs as identical with the individual he saw at the Trade Mart during September 1963, and added this was the same individual, was, in his opinion, identical with Oswald. Core continued to examine the photographs referred to and picked out a white male described by Core below as being an associate of Oswald on this occasion, but that he did not know the name of this individual. All right, so before I continue, let me go ahead and explain what's going on here and what really fucking happened. So if you recall, Oswald is filmed and photographed handing out the flyers on the street corner, right? The pamphlets on the street corner. And as he's doing that, he is then interviewed, and a date is set for him to be interviewed again in the studios of WDSU, where he happens to somewhat debate, talk to Carlos Bernier. Okay, now Carlos Bernier, the incident with Carlos Bernier happened on August the 9th. Okay, and that incident took place very shortly after. So the incident was not in September; it was in August, at the latest, mid-August, maybe the 10th or 11th. But the problem we have here is that when you go through the statements of William Gaudet, now William Gaudet, as it turns out, is a full-time CIA agent, an employee, not a contract agent. William Gaudet was an OSS guy who worked for fucking Donovan and worked directly for Nelson Rockefeller in Nelson Rockefeller's activities in Latin America. Okay, so Gaudet is an expert on Latin America, and Gaudet is working in a building across from the Trade Mart, but he eventually moves his business into the Trade Mart. But on the day that this happens, which is in mid-August of 1963, Gaudet sees Oswald out on the street, and he fucking personally calls Jesse Core. Jesse Core doesn't name him in his statement here, but it was William Gaudet who called Jesse Core. William Gaudet also happens to be the third person who got a visa September 17th, 1963, from the Mexican consul in New Orleans, the same day, allegedly, that Oswald did, and the same day that David Magyar did. Okay? But now, coincidentally, he sees Oswald out on the street, and so he calls Jesse Core, and then Jesse Core, what does Jesse Core do? So Jesse Core makes it seem like in this fucking statement that he got called from WDSU to see if their photographer was on scene, right? But he doesn't mention that WDSU knew that a photographer would be on scene because Jesse Core called John Corporan, okay? John Corporan at WDSU. Okay, all of these guys work for the fucking CIA. You have to understand this, right? This is all CIA bullshit. William Gaudet, Jesse Core, and fucking John Corporan are all CIA. So, Jesse Core calls John Corporan. John Corporan then sends his fucking photographer down there and a guy to interview Oswald. Then, who does it say called? Does it even say who called Core? No, it didn't even say, but it was fucking John Corporan, okay? So he leaves all that out of his statement, leaves Gaudet out of his statement, leaves John Corporan out of his statement, and those are crucial because this whole incident was set up, right? So Kerry Thornley had the flyers printed at Jones Printing. Douglas Jones identified Kerry Thornley as the man who picked up the flyers to Harold Weisberg. He stamps 544 Camp Street because Kerry Thornley is working with those guys at 544 Camp Street, right? With Guy Bannister and with Sergio Arcacha and Gordon Novell and all those fucks who are working out of 544 Camp Street. And that idiot puts 544 Camp Street on the flyers that he then hands to Oswald to go hand out. I don't fucking think Oswald ever stepped foot in 544 Camp Street. The idea that he ever stepped foot in 544 Camp Street is ridiculous to me once you realize Kerry Thornley is the man impersonating Oswald all over fucking New Orleans, and he was the one associated with all these fucks, okay? Not to mention he was directly associated with Oswald and handling him, right? So when you come to understand this infrastructure that's built up around handling Oswald, and you come to understand the role of William Gaudet, and you come to understand the role of Jesse Core and John Corporan, you come to read this fucking statement by Jesse Core, and you're like, dude, shut the fuck up. Okay? You're fucking lying. So, let me continue. Let me see here. This is all nonsense. Don't need to read that. I'm just checking to see if I already read this. I might have. I think I did actually already read this. This is the opening parts of the initial interview with David Ferrie when they interview him at his place. Remember, they went to his house and it was like a disgusting pigsty. The whole incident of the library card attributed to Oswald having been in Oswald's possession that was allegedly David Ferrie's. That never happened. That was just more Jack Martin's nonsense. Nothing too important here. Ferrie's just telling him he never owned a rifle like that, never taught anybody how to shoot rifles. Talking about the airplane. Now we have a duplication of the investigation, allegedly letting Ferrie off of the hook. All right, so here we have a document that is the factual background for reasons stated in discharge of Captain Ferrie. This is the reasons that David Ferrie was discharged from Eastern Airlines, the final disposition. During 61 and 62, the following criminal charges were brought against Captain Ferrie in Orleans and Jefferson Parish based on sworn affidavits of complaining witnesses. Orleans, 1738991, extortion, nol pros. And then number 2, public intimidation of state witness, nol pros. That was the incident with Andrew Blackman and Sergio Arcacha. Crimes against nature, no prost, right? So all of these fucking crimes that he did were no prost. It pays to be in the CIA, that's for sure. All right, now we have an interview of Mike Finney, who was in the Civil Air Patrol, and he is providing a statement here. Basically, this is more character statements on David Ferrie. All right, so what do we have here? So one of the things I have to comment on, which I think is kind of funny, is that when David Ferrie got in trouble, Sergio Arcacha Smith thought that he would do him a favor and write a letter on his behalf to Eastern Airlines as a representative of the Cuban Democratic Revolutionary Front at the address at the Balter Building, New Orleans, Louisiana. He thought this would be a good idea to write this fucking letter to Eastern Airlines on behalf of David Ferrie. Okay, so I'm mixing up another letter. There's 2 letters from Sergio Arcacha, and so I'm going to clarify here. Okay, so at one point, David Ferrie tried to get a leave of absence from Eastern so he could do some, like, fucking who knows what. The cover story was he needed to do some raids on Cuba or fly to Cuba or something like that. But the reality was, nobody knows what the reality was, right? He's probably doing some child fucking trafficking nonsense. So Sergio Arcacha Smith writes a letter to Eastern Airlines trying to get them to give him the time off, and they reject it. This is the response to Sergio Arcacha Smith and his request to get David Ferrie out of work for a couple of days. God, it's like having your friend write a letter to the school claiming to be your dad to get you out of fucking class for a day, right? Hilarious. Dear Mr. Smith, the request made in your letter of July 16th to Captain Rickenbacker has been given careful consideration. Unfortunately, we will be unable to give Captain Ferrie a leave at this time for several reasons. In the first place, our flight crews are all badly needed at the present time due to the volume of our flight operation this time of year. In addition to this fact, Eastern found it necessary several years ago to establish a policy of not granting leaves of absence with pay for any political reason. This policy has been followed for many years, regardless of the company's sympathies for the political cause involved. I am sorry we are unable to grant Captain Ferrie a leave of absence as requested. Yours truly, it looks like the name signed is J.P. Halliburton. That's interesting. Here's a copy of the letter that he had written to Eastern. This is kind of background fluff. I really don't see that. There's nothing overly pressing other than it establishes a relationship between Arcacha and David Ferrie, a very close professional one. We don't know if there's anything more. It doesn't appear like Arcacha was going to put up with any of the gay shit that was going on. Here, okay, so this document here is from the Holy Catholic Apostolic Church. This is where David Ferrie got kicked out of. Don't really see the need to go too much into this. If we went in depth into every single page in this document, we'd be here for months. So this, just in summary, this is all part of the Eastern Airlines investigation because David Ferrie was a pedophile, right? So this is more communication documents. Dear Mr. Bell, in response to your request November 762, I've ascertained the status of the case pending against David Ferrie. So yeah, so Garrison figured out that there was a case against David Ferrie and that it got null prost or it got dismissed, and he went to great lengths to pull all the documents related to that. And really, when you get to know all the facts, and a lot of these documents are missing, you really come to realize that there was a lot of shit going on that Garrison didn't know about in the beginning that becomes obvious with David Ferrie and, molesting kids. So, what is this? Jack Martin, letter from Jack Martin. All right. Today I got a lot of stuff on the agenda, so I'm going to call it quits for today right here, and we're going to pick up right here tomorrow with this information from Jack Martin. Looks like we have some YMCA letterhead, and that's it. So I thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you tomorrow.